Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Revolution Recap. The Revs came away from the second game of the MLS's Back Tournament with 1 point after a 1-1 draw with DC United. Adam Buksa broke open the scoring early in the second half with his second goal in the Revs jersey to give the good guys a lead, but a lapse of judgment from Tony De La Mea proved costly, resulting in the lone goal from DC United and ultimately a 1-1 draw. The Revs now go into the third game of the group stage with 4 points and are now behind Toronto FC on goal differential in the group. I'm Greg Johnstone. Joining me today is Sean Donahue. Sean, how's it going?
Pretty good. I mean, the Revolution are in a good position. It was a interesting match to watch, despite the fact that the Revolution should have come away with 3 points and left with just one.
Absolutely. And also joining us today is Seth Macomber from the Bent Musket. Seth, how are you today?
Good. Happy to be here. I feel like it's pretty rare for me to be on the podcast with Sean and you, so happy to have all three of us here.
Yeah, it's nice to reunite the A team. No one tell Jake, but I think this is our A grouping right here.
Well, he doesn't listen.
Wow. Well, nobody from Connecticut, so we're already winning.
Yeah, there we go. But let's get into some key takeaways. Seth, I'll start with you. What's your key takeaway from yesterday's draw?
Yeah, I think my key takeaway is that DC came out and pressured the Revs, and that caused a lot of problems with their passing. And the first game of the tournament, a lot of people were complimenting the Revs, and rightfully so, for how well they were connecting passes and making things work, especially along that back line. But really, when you go back and watch the game, they were not pressuring the ball at all. Like, Montreal was getting back into a deep shell, and that allowed the Revs to move the ball very quickly, to find their opportunities. It was amazing also to think about how often Carlos Gil was able to turn around and have space against Montreal. And after the game, Thierry Henry really criticized his team, saying that they did not play well, they didn't have energy. A week later, we have DC United as the opponent for the Revolution, and they were willing to press the ball. A couple numbers that I came out of and show that this is definitely a trend. De La Mea passed the ball to Turner 7 times last night, and he did not pass the ball at all to Turner when playing against Montreal. So we saw that a lot even in the early going, that De La Mea, when he wasn't sure where to go, he would go back to Turner, long ball, and that would create a lot of long ball situations that the Revolution weren't necessarily handling well. Another number that I pulled out from Stat Zone that I thought was interesting is that against Montreal, the Revs made 31 long ball attempts and 22 were completed. Against DC, that number was 45, and they completed 23. So you can see that once you start pressuring the Revs, they were giving away the ball more often. They were going longer more often. It was really disrupting the game that we saw. So I think there's a lot that we can analyze in this game and try to understand where the true weaknesses and strengths of the Revs are right now and how they can continue to build on that as we hopefully head towards a regular season.
Yeah, I think you make a great point, Seth, and it was a completely different game from what we saw against Montreal as far as the tactics of the opponent. Like you said, with Montreal, I think the Revs had a lot of freedom because Montreal really didn't press them much at all and kind of let the game come to them. And that really kind of played into the Revs and what they were trying to do. And in this game, DC United was a lot more aggressive at pressing. And I still don't think DC United is that great of a pressing team, or at least from what they saw in this game was that great of a pressing team. They just did it a lot more than Montreal, but you're right. This led to a lot more back passes to Turner. I think Turner had close to 2 times as many pass attempts as he had in the prior game, and I think he only didn't connect on 2 of them against Montreal, and I think there were 12 in this game that he didn't connect on. And a lot of those were long balls. So yeah, that pressure certainly caused problems for the Revolution. And just in general too, we talked a lot about how in the prior game, Brandon Bai and to a lesser extent, Boutner were able to get forward a lot because of the way Montreal played and how Montreal really wasn't pressing. And in this game, they had to do a lot more defending. And if you kind of look at their passing charts, and in particular their forward passing charts, Boutner only connected on 7 of 19 forward pass attempts, and Brandon Bai only connected on 14 of 29 forward pass attempts. So those two guys that were really effective passing the ball in the game against Montreal had to do a lot more defending in this game and didn't have as much success going forward. And I think that was kind of a product of again, DC United's tactics. So I thought the two of those guys did a decent job defending when they were forced into it in this game. But the Revs' strategy certainly had to evolve in this one because of what DC United did to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, we talked about a little bit last week about how Thierry Henry, his tactics seemed to be lacking a little bit. And it seemed like Ben Olsen and DC United was just a lot more prepared to face the Revs than Montreal. It was a completely different game as you guys are mentioning, and the Revs certainly were not as in control as they were in the Montreal game, and had a little bit more resistance. Sean, let's move over to your key takeaway. What did you take away from this match?
Yeah, my takeaway is that the Revolution defense, we still don't know what the Revs' best defense is out there. I think this game was kind of a proving point for that. And I don't think we've gotten into the injuries yet, but Seth asked in the press conference after the game why Bruce Arena subbed Michael Mancienne at halftime, and he said it was muscle tightness. And this was, again, the reason why he was subbed out in the game a week ago in the 66th minute. So, it's great to see Michael Mancienne coming back onto the field and playing pretty well. I don't think he's really done too much wrong in these two games. Again, I don't think he's been tested in either of these two games as much as he might be against, say, a Toronto FC. But to have a center back that needs to be subbed in both games is not a good thing for the Revolution. You talk about positions that about the 5 sub rule and how it's nice to make a lot of changes. One position you don't want to make subs in is center back, because the chemistry there and the cohesion there is so important. And those guys kind of, as a game goes on, grow together and adapt together into the style of the game. So to make a sub there can be really detrimental to a team. I think actually when we had Henry Kessler on a while back and we mentioned that 5 sub rule to him, he talked about how it probably wouldn't impact him very much because center backs is a position that doesn't get subbed. And here he is 2 games into the tournament and he's been subbed in both times. But there's a lot of question marks now for the Revolution at center back. I think people were excited that the Revs got a shutout in the first game. And again, I don't think Delamay and Mancienne had much of a step wrong, although again, I don't think they had much pressure on them. In this game, they had more pressure on them. Mancienne picks up another injury. Delamea has that terrible turnover that leads to Higuain's equalizing goal. And I think you leave this game with more questions than answers about who the Revolution's best center backs are. And I would not be the least bit surprised if we go into the final game of the season, or the final game of the group play, I should say, and we see, Delamea out of the lineup, Mancienne out of the lineup, and Kessler and Farrell, who were kind of the starters at the beginning of the year, right back into it. It certainly seems like Bruce Arena has been heavily reliant on veterans in this tournament so far, and to a certain extent I get that. These are guys that his young players haven't had a chance to train and fully get ready for this in the way I'm sure he'd like to get them prepared, so he's relied on kind of the veterans that you'd expect can step in more quickly and have that experience. But I don't know if that's the right long-term answer for the Revolution. In particular, when you see the substitutions as well, that Bruce Arena has been hesitant to give his young guys playing time in these first 2 games. So, my takeaway, though, is that the defense, there's still a lot more questions than answers, and I don't think that Bruce Arena has found his best 2 center backs yet.
I have a theory that, because we know Bruce Arena likes the 5 sub rule, I think he likes the 5 sub rule because he can start Mancienne knowing that he's going to come out with an injury at some point, and he won't have to necessarily burn one of his 3 priority subs, especially if he pulls him at halftime, right? No, but I'm serious. I totally agree with that. And I think that part of it is that there's value in partnerships. I imagine that in practice, Kessler and Andrew Farrell are probably partnering quite a bit, and their opponent in practice is probably Delamea and Mancienne. So with Farrell not available in that first game, maybe that's the reasoning why we saw Delamea and Mancienne, because there's already that familiarity between those two, so you can naturally plug them in and hopefully they have some chemistry. And probably the same thing with the midfield pairing of Caldwell and Rowe, because they would probably very likely play against Sahibo and Fagundes. And then, like you said, they win 1-0 in the opener. It's kind of hard to say we're going to switch everything around because we already got this victory. But I put this out because I thought there were going to be changes in the starting lineup after I said that. And I said I was a little bit surprised there weren't changes because I don't think this is necessarily the Revolution's best lineup that they put out last night. Would it be a little unfair to change it up because of the success after game 1? Yeah, maybe. But in retrospect now, we might be looking back and saying that there probably should have been some changes to the starting lineup.
Yeah, and one thing, too, that I thought was really interesting, last week, Bruce Arena was asked about the center back pairing and why he went with Mancienne and Tony Delamea. And he mentioned Andrew Farrell had a bit of an injury, which I assume is the reason he was held out yesterday. And he said, yeah, so Farrell was unavailable. And it really came down to Henry Kessler versus Tony Delamea, which I thought was pretty interesting that those were the 2 people he was debating. I would have assumed it would have been De La Mea and Kessler, but instead in game one, he was debating between starting Henry Kessler and Tony De La Mea, and he said, and it was really kind of neck and neck. So I do think that he was kind of going with the veteran pairing of Tony De La Mea and Michael Mancienne. I think he likes them as a combo. I wonder if Andrew Farrell comes back healthy next week. We were told he should be ready to go. I don't even think he was listed on the injury report. All indications were that he should be prepared for this game yesterday, but still no appearance from Andrew Farrell in that game. So I wonder if we see a center back switch to Andrew Farrell and Henry Kessler, and they like that pairing a little bit more than Mancienne and Tony De La Mea, because you have to assume that Michael Mancienne, I mean, I don't want to say he's injury prone, but this is the second straight game where he has cramped up, that he has not made it 90 minutes. And, as Seth has said, thank God for the 5 subs, or else the Revs would be in a bit of a, they'd be behind the 8 ball in terms of lineup management. But, I don't know if you run Mancienne out there again. He hasn't done anything to be benched, but he doesn't seem 90 minutes fit right now. And then you add in these short turnarounds for a game on Tuesday. I imagine they're going to go to a fully rested Andrew Farrell, and I imagine they're going to go to Henry Kessler, who has been pretty solid in the time that we've seen him. So the one thing I will say is, in regards to Tony De La Mea, obviously we all saw the error that led to the goal. Obviously it was a huge error, big lapse in judgment. But overall, I thought outside of that one mistake, I didn't think he had that poor of a game. It's just those are the moments that are going to completely define you as a defender. And I expect to see 2 different center backs next.
Greg, I'm glad you brought up that quote from Bruce Arena, where he basically implied that the decision was between De La Mea and Henry Kessler and not really Mancienne. And you also mentioned last week about how maybe we're being harsh on Mancienne because he's had so many injuries with the Revolution. He's never fully been healthy. But, you kind of get to the point now where you look at Michael Mancienne. He's 32 years old. He's played in some of the most bruising leagues in the world, between the Premier League with Chelsea, a few games, the Championship in England, which, again, is a very physical league, the Bundesliga, a very physical league. So, he's a guy that's got a lot of miles on his legs and a lot of very difficult, very physical leagues. And I don't think it's, unfair to say that perhaps at 32 years old, he has taken so much of a beating that, he has become injury prone. And especially when you're playing in the Florida heat, he keeps having this muscle tightness. So, maybe Michael Mancienne is a better defender than I give him credit for, even at this stage in his career. But at some point, it's too much of a risk to keep putting a center back out there, even with the 5 sub rule. If you're not convinced he's going to make it 90 minutes. So, it'll be very interesting to see what moves Bruce Arena makes, but especially on short rest, I think that Michael Mancienne is going to go to the bench. And then you mentioned Tony De La Mea and kind of the giveaway in this game, and I agree. Otherwise, he's played pretty well in these first 2 games. But kind of the knock on Tony De La Mea, and I've always thought he's a good defender, is that he's a defender that will have 1, 2, or 3 boneheaded plays a month if you're starting him every game, and they're boneheaded plays to the level of a boneheaded play that you'd expect a veteran center back to maybe have once or twice a year. And when you're playing that role and you play 89 great minutes, but 1 minute where you make that play that costs your team a goal, if that's happening 2 or 3 times a month, and we've seen in the past him getting boneheaded red cards or things like that have really cost the team. That's just too much from a center back. It kind of goes back to the same thoughts that I've had about Kellen Rowe in these first 2 games, where he's doing a lot of good things, but 1 or 2 big mistakes can cost your team a game when you're playing in that position. And for De La Mea, if he's going to be an everyday starter, I think it's too much.
Well, you were ready to throw that Mancienne line right back at me, aren't you? You were ready to completely throw the you were too mean to Michael Mancienne discussion right back in my face. I should have been prepared for this one, but I will say I want to be very clear though. I don't want to call him injury prone. I just don't think he's fit. I mean, I think that's a lot more fair to say, because I think some people, that have had injuries in the past, you can be 100% recovered from injury, and I think people kind of unfairly stereotype people as, this person's not reliable because he's been hurt, a few other years. And so I think in some cases it's a bit of a bad narrative. But boy, he sure fits. He sure does have a lot of things that act up, and I don't know if I want to label him as injury prone or made of glass or any of the other things that people are saying about him, but. He doesn't seem like he can go out and go 90 minutes, at least in the Orlando Heat. And if he can't, you have 3 other center backs that can do a decent job. Tony De La Mea mistakes notwithstanding, as you just said, Sean. But I don't know why they keep running him out there. So we'll see. I don't think he gets a third chance to go 90 minutes. But we'll find out. So I want to go to my takeaway, though, which is that it's not time to panic just yet for the Revs. I see a lot of people upset. I think a lot of people are putting a lot of pressure into this Toronto game. I think a lot of people are stressed about this game. And even in the worst case scenario with the Revolution, they should still be advancing. If you look at the standings, obviously you automatically move on if you're 1 or 2 in your group. 4 of the 6 3 seeds move on. In Group A, Inter Miami and New York City FC both have 0 points, and they play each other. So at most they're going to have 3 points. The Revs have 4, so they automatically are above one of those bottom teams. If you look at Group E, New York Red Bulls and FC Cincinnati are playing. FC Cincinnati probably is going to lose that game because they are terrible. So the Revs are going to be above them in the standings. Even if they don't, if FC Cincinnati wins, they're above New York Red Bulls. If Red Bulls and Cincinnati tie and they end up with 4 points, even if the Revs lose, they would have to fall below FC Cincinnati in goal differential, and FC Cincinnati has -3 goal differential right now. So the Revs would have to lose by 4 goals, basically, to just get in the conversation of not making it past the group stage. So I think a lot of people suddenly have this, impression that TFC is this critical game. Really, this is just for jockeying for position. It's going to be a very, very tough game. I don't have a whole lot of expectations that they will beat Toronto FC. I think if you come out of a draw, I think that's I'd be pleased with that. Toronto FC, outside of a really horrible 30 minutes against DC United, have looked pretty good. So their offense is certainly going to test the Revolution defense a lot more than DC United and Montreal Impact have. So I'm not preparing for the worst, but if the Revs lose 2-0, it isn't the end of the world. And I just want to tell everyone to take a deep breath, step away from the panic button. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I think that I think that Toronto's going to be an interesting opponent because their offense looks very, very good. If you watched both of the games, they are dynamic. They're combining well. They're going to cause a lot of headaches for the Revolution unless they really figure things out along that back line. Defensively, however, the Toronto FC hasn't been that good. And they're also another team that has to change their defenders at the wrong times, changing up center backs, creating problems. But even when they're keeping their main guys in there, Mavinga and Gonzalez, they don't necessarily look that good. So I think that the Revolution are going to have to bring the game to them and really try to score early. That said, the Revolution aren't very good when they score first. They've only won once this year when they score first, in fact. So I think that that's a problem that you're looking at with this Revolution team, that yes, it's about the tournament, but hopefully there's also this regular season. And if they're going to end up, going up the Eastern Conference, they have to win games like this. And you could also look at this and say this is a difficult game to judge because of the Orlando Heat, because of the conditions. But the Revs got over a week of rest, and they were healthy. Like you mentioned, there was only one name on the injury report, and that's Casado. And we know that's a guy that's not going to be playing this season. So this is really a game that, you score first against an Eastern Conference foe. You have to do better. And maybe that doesn't affect you that much in the tournament, but these types of performances will certainly affect you when it comes to the regular season. And it's definitely a big loss overall.
Yeah, Seth, you bring up a great point, because I don't think anyone really is thinking about the regular season standings right now. And I guess we don't know that the season's going to resume after this. Bruce Arena thinks it's going to, and we hope that it's going to, if it can be done safely. But if you switch over from the group stage standings to the actual MLS standings, the Revolution are below the red line right now, and yeah, it's only 4 games, but again, we don't know how many games are going to be in the regular season if there is one. So yeah, this Toronto FC game does matter as far as Revolution actually making the playoffs, if there is a regular season that continues and if there is a playoffs that continues, because right now the Revs are in 8th place, just below that red line. DC United is actually the team that's above them. So that adds a little bit extra importance to the game that took place on Friday. And a win there would have put the Revolution in a much better position as far as playoff positioning for the regular season, if that does actually continue.
Okay, well, I will amend my answer to I'm not panicked in the context of the MLS's Back Tournament group stage. I'm having a bit of a rough day here so far. I'm getting from all sides. I will also add another caveat, which is I am not totally worried given Carlos Gil is healthy. He limped off yesterday in the 62nd minute, subbed off for Diego Fagundes. Obviously an early night, and he said earlier in the week at his press conference that he's still getting into the rhythm of things, but his heel is still, or his foot, I should say, is still not 100% healthy. Sean, on a scale of 1 to 10, where is your panic meter with Carles Heel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested to see what comes out, today or tomorrow or whenever they give us more of an update, because I think it's very worrying that they subbed him out in the 66th minute, and I assumed it was just a tactical thing, but he was limping, and they said after the game that it's the same injury that he had in preseason, and when you have something like that flares up again, it could be nothing, it could be just like a minor thing that goes away, but more often than not, it seems to be more of a serious issue that could keep him out for a while. So, and particularly when you see how the Revolution played after he was subbed out compared to how they played with him on the field, and again, as my key takeaway last week about how important Carles Heel is to the Revolution, if he's out for any extended period of time, I think the Revolution are in serious trouble, and the conversation goes from them, potentially being a dark horse contender in this tournament to, is it a success that they just made it out of the group stage?
Yeah, and last year he played all but 8 minutes in 2019. That's pretty crazy to think about. Like, he was a guy that you could rely upon no matter what. He's a guy who really probably didn't want to come off the field because he's such a warrior, such a battler. So the fact that he missed the first 2 games of the season, that's something. And I remember talking to you, Greg, about how worried should we be that he's missing those games. And I said, that's not that big of a deal in my mind. Yes, the Revs aren't going to look as good. Yes, they might drop points. But as long as he gets healthy, he's such a game changer. Everything's going to be good. So you just want him to be at full health so he can be playing his best soccer. He comes back in the MLS's Back Tournament. Things look good, 12 big chances created. He plays 90 minutes. All seems like it's good. And then a week later, he comes off in the 62nd minute. That's pretty concerning, And the fact that he earlier in the week said that he doesn't feel 100%, the fact that after the game, Bruce Arena says it's the same exact injury and that he's going to be checked out by a doctor on Saturday, that's concerning. It could be nothing. It could definitely be precautionary, but I think that's kind of interesting that he did say, Arena kind of said that it was the same injury and that we are just going to continue to evaluate it, as opposed to saying that it was something minor. Like with Mancien saying that it was muscle tightness, that seemed like a minor thing to me. He makes it to halftime. He's like, I'm cramping up. Maybe I didn't, the weather's really getting to me. Okay, fine. We'll take you off because we have other options. For Heel to come out, a guy who really never comes out, and for it to be the same injury, I think is a little bit concerning.
Yeah, and I think Greg asked to put it on a 1 to 10 scale, and I ignored that. But I'm gonna put it at a 7 right now, and say that this could be a big deal for the Revolution.
Seth, same thing. Give me a number here, Seth. Where's your panic meter at?
Yeah, I'll give it a 7 too, because you still don't know where it's at. But I think that Sean is spot on because everything goes through Carles Heel right now. It is really absurd how important he is to the team. And I went back and watched the second half before this podcast. And when he comes off the field, things became much more direct. It didn't seem like Rowe and Caldwell were getting on the ball and trying to provide that same type of linking between the defense and the offense. Diego, who came in for him, did the same thing. He wasn't really providing the influence you'd want him to have. And we'll probably talk about it, but we can mention it right now. It was pretty very noticeable how often you could hear Kellen Rowe's name being called from the sidelines. Like, come on, Kellen, get into the game, Kellen. Because there was a lot of times when the defense is passing the ball on their back line, and Rowe, who you kind of hope would be the person, wasn't getting on the ball. You'd hope that he gets his body on the half turn, receives the ball, and then tries to find someone. But instead of that happening, a lot of times it was going a little bit more direct and trying to find Busco, who can do that type of thing, but they weren't finding a lot of success with those long balls. So with Carles Heel out of the game, you're going to have to find somebody else that can link between the defense and the offense. You're going to have to do that anyway, in my opinion. I think the team is much too reliant on Carles Heel. But because he's so crafty, because he's so good, you're able to get away with that in games. If he's not on the field, you definitely have to find a plan B. So I'll give it a 7, like Sean said, because we don't know the extent of the injury. Who knows? Maybe like a couple days of rest, he's good to go and everything's fine. But if we find out that he's on the injury report, I would definitely increase that to a higher number.
Yeah, and overall, Carles Heel, just to run through his numbers real quick, 33 for 40 passing, including that's 83%, 16 for 23 in the attacking third. He had 3 chances created in 62 minutes. So bit of a quote-unquote quiet night for Carles Heel. Certainly less of an effect than he did against DC, but still made a bit of an impact and still not at 100%. And I just want to kind of move over to a couple of brief listener notes and listener questions because we're kind of hitting on this right now. So MJ said it's very concerning how the attack grinds to a halt once Heel is out of the game, eerily similar to the first 2 games of the year. Fagundes hasn't shown any ability to distribute the past 2 seasons. We are in trouble if Heel's foot injury is a chronic issue. So he seems to agree with your sentiments. And then we also got a question from Revolution Report who said, are the Revs too dependent on Carles Heel? And Seth, I believe you said in your answer, the Revs are too dependent on Carles Heel. So you've already kind of answered that one. But Sean, I assume you're kind of in the same boat here that if Carles Heel isn't on the field, it's a really, really big issue for the Revs.
Yeah, and Seth made the excellent point about how Carles Heel only didn't play 8 minutes last year. And, when somebody brings up Diego Fagundes and him not kind of filling in that Carles Heel role in the past 2 years, it's because, for that very reason, he hasn't had to. Carles Heel has been on the field other than really the first 2 games this season and the end of the last game. So Diego Fagundes has at times shown he's capable of, doing some of that distributing and doing some of that play, particularly early on in Brad Friedel's tenure. But he hasn't really been asked to do that much since. And I don't know that he's capable of stepping up and certainly he's not Carles Heel. But I don't know that he's capable of stepping up and being a poor man's Carles Heel, or if that's, not really his style anymore. So, I completely agree with Seth that somebody has to step up. But, the point that Seth makes too is that the Revs are really reliant on Carles Heel, but Carles Heel is such a good player that the Revs can afford to be really reliant on him when he's healthy because, for another team to shut him down, they have to give him a lot of attention. And, you can give Carles Heel a lot of attention and shut him down. And DC did to some extent in this game. You mentioned he only had 3 chances created compared to, 12 against Montreal, but even with that stat, I think at least 2 of those chances were off corner kicks. So yeah, it really was kind of a quiet game for Carles Heel. But because of that, I think there was more space for a guy like Gustavo Bo and Adam Buxa than there would be if Carles Heel wasn't on the field. So yeah, I think both of those comments are absolutely accurate, and it's going to be really tough for the Revolution if Carles Heel is out for any period. Let's
move quickly to the lineups. I know we've kind of touched on the lineups and the subs briefly here, and I also know that we talked about it a little bit at length last week. We don't need to go into everything again, but were you guys, I think you both have said you were surprised about the lineups. Were you also surprised that it took a little bit of time to get some subs kind of late in the game? Subs also to run through, obviously Mancienne came off at halftime. Heel came off in the 62nd minute. Both of those, Bruce seemed to be forced to pull them off the field. But after that, Teal came on for Scott Caldwell in the 77th minute, and then Renix and Buchanan came in the 90th minute. Are you guys kind of frustrated with the substitution patterns?
I was. I think that this tournament, in my mind, was going to be an opportunity to showcase some young players. And I think other teams have done that. And some of those guys are started at other teams, like Brendan Aronson is really good for the Philadelphia Union. Ao Akinole was really good filling in for Josie Altidore for Toronto FC. And I don't think necessarily some of these younger guys for the Revs should be starting, but I was expecting some of those guys to come off the bench. For me, Tayon Buchanan and DeJuan Jones being on the left and the right wing would cause absolute nightmares for opponents. Like, they're just so quick and so crafty. And to put those guys as wide midfielders for 15 minutes, I think would create a lot of problems for the opposition. So I wish I could see a little bit more of them. I thought it was interesting midweek where I was talking to Bruce. The media was talking to Bruce. It wasn't a one-on-one with Bruce, okay? Even though him and I are tight, we weren't talking this week. But when the media, I asked him about the lineup, and he talked about how he expects to see some other players later on. And one of the names he dropped was Rivera, who was very, very good during the preseason, and we haven't seen him at all. So I think there's opportunities, I would hope, to get some of those guys in. And I know that Bruce in the past has really relied on his experienced players. Sean made a really good point about this, that Bruce Arena finds his guys and puts them in there and says, I'm going to play you for the duration. And maybe there is a little bit of concern about taking someone off like Christian Pinilla or Gustavo Bo, who could create something in a minute's notice. I mean, those guys are so creative that you can be quiet for 80 minutes and all of a sudden have that moment of brilliance. And we've seen that time and time again. If you take those guys off the field, obviously they can't have those moments of brilliance. But I do think that given the conditions, given the heat, given the pace of the game, that putting someone out there that's just going to be out there and be absolute energy would bring a lot of value to the team. And maybe if, Justin Rennicks or if Tajon Buchanan finished one of those chances in the first 2 games of the season, maybe Arena has a little bit more faith in those younger guys to go out there and create havoc. But I do think that, especially for a guy who likes the 5-sub rule, I think that he should have been looking to his bench a little bit earlier, because to come in basically at stoppage time, there's not much opportunity to make a difference now. You're almost asking those guys to go out there and use their energy to make sure that DC doesn't score another goal.
Yeah, I agree completely with everything you just said, and just to kind of further emphasize the point you made too about taking off Pania and Gustavo Bo. Arena said that after the game in the press conference, that kind of his thought process on why he waited so long was that he didn't want to take off. To make one of those subs, he was going to have to take off either Adam Buksa, Gustavo Bo, or Christian Pania at that point, and he kind of was hesitant to do that, and he would have been happy to finish the game with those guys on the field. And everything you just said, I completely agree with that. Christian Pania is a guy that can kind of create a goal at a moment's notice. Gustavo Bo, obviously a guy that can do that. We've seen it time and time again. But in saying that, this is a situation where they're playing down in Orlando, where it is very hot, where you could see how much these guys were sweating, where guys looked like they were tired, where you were playing a DC United game that was on really short rest and that, had played with 10 men for the majority of their last game. So there's no question this DC United team was not 100%. And the Revs actually ceded a lot of possession to DC in the second half. They controlled the possession in the first half. In the second half, DC had more possession. And again, this was an opportunity for the Revolution to really tire them out and really take advantage of DC's tired legs. And instead, it was kind of DC that looked the fresher team at points in the second half. To me, that was a sign the Revolution should have made subs sooner. Even Wilfred Zahibo as a substitution when the Revolution were leading earlier in this game would have made sense to me. And then late in the game when the Revolution, when the score was knotted up, I don't understand why they waited till the 91st minute to bring on Buchanan and Rennicks. I also don't know why they necessarily went with Rennicks over DeJuan Jones. Maybe I've been playing too much FIFA, but the strategy of bringing on really fast wingers late in the game against a tired defense seems to make a lot of sense to me. And they waited too late to do that in this game. It's very hard to have an impact coming off the bench with 4 minutes to go. And Buchanan and Rennicks really didn't have an impact because there wasn't that time. So I don't know why Bruce Arena is so hesitant to make these subs. He was in the first game as well. I think that there was the forced sub to Mancien in the first game as well, and then the next sub didn't come until very late in the game. So yeah, I think in this situation where guys have not had months to build up their fitness and to become 90 minutes fit when you're playing in extreme heat in Orlando, and especially when you're playing against a team that clearly has tired legs, it doesn't make any sense to me to wait so late to bring on those guys that can kind of be game changers. And I like the Teal Bunbury for Scott Caldwell sub, but Bunbury's not that fast of a player anymore at this point either. He doesn't have the same wheels he used to have. He used to be that guy that could kind of stretch a defense and cause all those problems on tired legs. I don't think he's really that player anymore.
Yeah, and I just want to mention this quote really fast. Bruce Arena said last night, we would have had to take off Pania or Bo or Buksa, so that's the reason we held out. DC United scored their goal around the 76th minute or so. I'm not exactly sure, but we would have been happy to play that game out with the group that was on the field. So yeah, it seems like they were trying to hold out in case, I think they seemed fine running that group out there and keeping them out until the end of the game. So I'm a bit surprised too. They seemed much more tired. And Sean, to your point, I'm surprised they don't bring DeJuan Jones out. If you want fresh legs, he's the fastest guy you have on the field. I mean, he played attack, he played winger in college. So I'm really surprised that we didn't see him at all. But I do want to get your thoughts on Adam Buksa, Gustavo Bo, and Christian Pania. The attack, they had a lot of chances, couldn't really finish all of them, obviously. Only Adam Buksa was the one that was able to find the back of the net. So, Sean, give me your assessment of those three and their performance yesterday.
Yeah, and just going back really quickly on Pania, you mentioned last week that Pania was a guy that you didn't necessarily want to see go 90 minutes, and I kind of agreed with that, and that's why it was was interesting to me to see Bruce Arena kind of lump him into that same category with his DPs, Adam Buxa and Gustavo Bo, when he's talking about substitutions, because yes, Pena is a guy that can be a game changer. He's also a guy that can kind of float out of a game for a long period of time. So I'm not sure that he belongs kind of in that same conversation. And he was a guy that I think, like a Juwan Jones should have come in for him. With that said, I thought, Pena had a classic Christian Pena game. There were times where he, wasn't that involved, and there were other times where he made some really nice plays. His deflected shot led to Adam Buxa's goal. He had a breakaway that, a player of his caliber should put away 9 times out of 10. And, his shot was decent and the save from Bill Hamid was better, but, that was a chance to put the game away and make it 2-0, and he didn't do that. So, again, Christian Pena game, a lot of good moments, a lot of moments of invisibility. And at the key moment, he didn't finish the chance. So, decent game for him. I think he continues to start, maybe not the next game because of tired legs, but he's a guy that I do think, you consider subbing in the 60th, 70th minute when you have a guy like DeJuan Jones or a guy like Tajon Buchanan on the bench. Adam Buxa, I thought, had a really good game. He gets knocked for, not having that many touches sometimes, but he should have had 2 assists in this game. I think he set up the Pena chance. He set up a Gustavo Bo chance where Gustavo Bo, volleyed well high of the net, and what he should have done a lot better with. And of course, he scored the goal on that deflected shot. Very alert from him, and he, did overall. He's shown he's very talented in the air. When you have a guy playing that role who attracts a lot of attention from the defense, and puts himself into a situation to win those chances, yes, his touches may be limited, and yes, he may not be the most active guy in the game, but he could have ended this game with a goal and 2 assists and been man of the match. So I don't think there's too much you can knock Adam Buxa on. And then getting to Gustavo Bo again is that guy that creates a lot of chances, can pop up and score out of nothing, but his shooting boots just don't seem to be there so far in this tournament. It's completely understandable that, you've been off for 4 months, that it takes a little while to get your clinical finishing down. He scored that fantastic goal last week, but probably should have had, 2 more goals. And in this game, I think he should have finished that layoff from Adam Buxa. I think that was a fantastic chance for him, and a player of his quality needs to put that on frame. I think Gustavo Bo, could kind of go either way in this one, because he had put himself in good positions, created some chances, but the finishing hasn't been good enough from him, and it's understandable given the scenario, but you'd like to see more from Gustavo Bo as far as putting shots in the net.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on Pena. I'm not going to add anything there. With Buxa, he's such an interesting person to me, because it feels like he's still trying to build that chemistry with the team, which totally makes sense. But he has shown that he's really good at a hold-up forward. He's really good when it comes to his technical ability on the ball, some of his turns that he's able to do. But there are times where it just feels like he's not quite linking up yet. And I'm thinking of a play where it was Brandon By, right after halftime, Brandon By to Bo. Bo sends in a low cross, and it feels like that's a type of ball that a guy who's a finisher in the box should be able to get to, that Buxa should be able to get to. And against Montreal, there was a similar play that was a shot / a cross. Probably Buxa's not getting to that one because of the way that Bo plays it. It feels like it's out of his reach. But I think that second ball from Bo in this last game was much more approachable, something that he could get to if he was making his stride correctly. There was another play in which the ball was played long, where he brings it down and he plays Bo, and he then opens up on the right-hand side to hypothetically receive a return pass, like a give and go, to then go to goal. Instead, Bo turns, and then he heads over to Heel. And I think that you just see that those two are so much more connected, Bo and Heel, that Buxa is still trying to find his role within that attack. And there was another, from the first half, there was a time where Adam Buxa checked in to try to receive the ball, and Heel just was there, and Buxa was like, oh yeah, it totally should be your ball. I'm going to back off. So in that moment, it wasn't really clear who should be going for that. He does back off, which is the right move, because Heel is the one that's actually facing the goal. But it just feels like there's still some misconnections between those players, where Heel and Bo are just, they have that rhythm. Since day one, they've had that connection. They have that chemistry. You still have to figure out how everything works in that attack when you have all of those weapons on the field. That said, I thought the second half in particular was really sharp from Buxa. I think there's a lot of talent there. Like you said, you score a goal, kind of a fluky goal, but if you're a finisher, you have to take any type of opportunity that's put in front of you and put it into the back of the net, and he certainly does that. But he had that great hold-up play that he finds Christian Pena. I mean, that's you'd love to see more of that. You would hope, like that he drops in, then he pulls all those defenders with him, creates some space in behind, and that's where you want Pania just to run at someone and run at space all day towards the goalie, and hopefully put it away in the future. So lots of encouraging stuff from Buxa, especially in the second half. But I still think that there's chemistry to build there, which is encouraging more than anything else, because he's still, 2 goals on the season, one with his foot, one with his head. That's pretty promising. But I think there's still more to be put into play there once they build more chemistry and understand how to play off of each other.
Yeah, and honestly, that Gustavo Bo chance that Buxa created is kind of what I was visualizing as this Revolution offense looking like when they signed Adam Buxa, is that, somebody sends in a cross or a long ball to Adam Buxa and he lays it off to a on-rushing Gustavo Bo who blasted into the back of the net. It just seemed like the perfect kind of setup with these guys' different skill sets, but we haven't seen too much of that yet. And there was that opportunity, and Gustavo Bo kind of blasted it over the net and wasted it. It was a great point you made about Gustavo Bo's pass in this game, because I thought he missed a golden opportunity by not setting in a good pass, by setting in a kind of a poor shot, cross, whatever it was, and the game against Montreal that there was no way Adam Buxa was getting to. And this game, I keep going back and forth. Like when I first saw that, it seemed like something Adam Buxa could get to, and then I'm trying to convince myself that it was something that he couldn't get to. But now I'm kind of leaning back towards that he probably should have gotten to that. But I completely agree with everything you just said about those two. But that's just kind of what I was visualizing the chemistry being between these players, is that Buxa using his height and his strength to kind of win balls in the air and lay it off for Gustavo Bo to finish. And that was the perfect example and opportunity for that to happen. And Bo just kind of launched it high of the net.
Yeah, and on the Buxa play too, he has to get around a defender. And I mean, I didn't go back and look at it as much as you guys, obviously, but it looks like he can't decide which way to go around the defender. It looks like at first he's going to go kind of towards the far post, and then he kind of cuts inside at the last minute and his stride's all thrown off. So I think that, I don't know if that's more chemistry or if that's more Buxa just kind of misjudging a play overall. But the Gustavo Bo play, I want to point out, we talked about Gustavo Bo's left foot last week and how he was relying on his left foot, and it wasn't always accurate. That blast over the bar was with Gustavo Bo's left foot, his only left-footed shot of the night. So obviously not his weaker foot. But yeah, two really big chances that really could have put this game away and made it a laugher before the Tony De La Mea era. But hopefully this attack kind of gets on all cylinders and certainly hits its stride for the TFC game. Before we move on to listener questions, I did want to ask about Kellen Rowe and Scott Caldwell. We talked about it a little bit last week, but I think that people were surprised, similar to the center back pairing, that we stuck with those two central midfielders. Sean, why don't you talk about Kellen Rowe and Scott Caldwell and how they did last night? And also, actually, why don't I add if you think they'll start against the TFC game on Tuesday?
Yeah, it was kind of an interesting game from both of them. I thought Scott Caldwell was pretty quiet in the first half and not as involved as we're used to seeing him, whereas Kellen Rowe was a bit more involved. I don't think either of them had a fantastic performance. Like you expect from a Scott Caldwell, his passing numbers were pretty good. He had 92% passing accuracy, and I think he was more involved kind of in the second half before he came off, actually. And then Kellen Rowe, 80% passing accuracy, not as good as what he had in the first game. Again, had a really nice long-range shot that hit off the crossbar early on. A good chance from him and a good effort from him. That's what you like to see from him. Those are the positives in his game. But he also had 1 or 2 turnovers. Seth mentioned that he kept hearing, "Come on, Kellen," coming from the sideline. At times in this game, and one of those times was when he actually did get back to receive a pass from the defenders, and then immediately sent a poor pass that led to a turnover and led to a potential chance for DC. I think both of their spots are kind of at risk right now. If I were to guess, I'd say Kellen Rowe maybe goes to the bench for Zahibo in the next game, but at the same time, it wouldn't surprise me if it was Caldwell either. I don't think either of those guys showed enough in this game to hold down their starting spot going forward. So I'm very interested to see what Bruce Arena does. With Kellen Rowe, there's a lot of positive things that he does, and I think he's a guy that the pluses on the offensive side are certainly more than the pluses on the offensive side from Scott Caldwell. But the negatives and the mistakes on the defensive side are the opposite. They're more of a risk than Scott Caldwell. So when you're playing a team like Toronto, in which maybe out of that central defensive midfield, you are more concerned with kind of limiting mistakes and doing more defensively, it might make sense to have Scott Caldwell be the starter in that game next to Zahibo. And in a game when you're going to have more control, and Kellen Rowe maybe has shown enough where maybe you can put him next to either Caldwell or Zahibo and kind of play a more offensive game. But both of these players in this game, I think there were some positives you can take away from it and some negatives. But for Kellen Rowe, it was kind of the same thing as against Montreal, where he did a lot of good, but had some key turnovers that really could have cost the Revs, and we're kind of lucky that they didn't.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Positive and negatives from both players. And like you said, that the negatives for Rowe could have been punished and could have led to goals. And I totally remember the play that you're talking about. He gets back, he puts himself in a body position in which he receives the ball, and then he actually has some time on the ball, and then just it's a turnover. Really, when it's not necessarily something that has to happen in that moment. It wasn't a lot of pressure on him. He should be able to pick out a pass in that moment. Caldwell, I think it's interesting for him because in Rowe too, but with Caldwell, you saw that when Bruce Arena came in, you didn't see a lot of Caldwell. Like, he was not getting a lot of minutes. He was not getting a lot of playing time. And then he gets that start during the playoffs. And then he gets the start in the season opener. He gets pulled at halftime. So we're kind of thinking, okay, Bruce Arena doesn't really trust Caldwell that much. And then he gets 2 starts in the MLS's Back Tournament. And I think there are some reasons why he's in there as far as keeping the ball, keeping the tempo. And there's a couple times this tournament that we've seen him play really good longer balls to try to unlock the defense. And I think that's what these guys are missing, that they don't have that ability to hit the cross-field ball, which Zahibo can do sometimes. He's not totally accurate with it all the time, but he definitely attempts it more than Rowe and Caldwell in my mind. But I think that's what Matt Polster's brought in to do, that he's someone that's going to try to keep the tempo, which Scott Caldwell can do really well, but he can also try to hit that cross-field ball to maybe someone like Brandon Bye, or maybe someone like Butner that's trying to run into the space and try to hit those early crosses in. So for both of those guys, I think that their spot is in jeopardy. I would imagine that we're going to see Zahibo. I mean, it's interesting that he's off the injury report at this point. We're told that it was a minor knock, but he doesn't come in at all. I think that, honestly, he's probably one of the guys I would have liked to see come into the game, whether it was before DC's goal or after DC's goal, just to kind of change things up a little bit, because I really didn't think the midfield was linking up really well with the attack. Like, they would get on the ball, but they weren't necessarily, being that presence to then move the ball forward. It was more that they would, get the ball forward, and then Kellen Rowe would go in and join the attack. Or it was more that you'd have Scott Caldwell move the ball along the back line, but not necessarily progress it that well to the attacking end. And I think that someone to be there to be that presence would have helped keep possession a little bit more and saw the game out in a different way. So I imagine that Zahibo should be ready to go, and maybe that's just a part of the game plan, that we want to make sure that he doesn't have to have this quick turnaround at all, that we want to be as close to 90-minute fit and fresh for the final game against Toronto FC. Who he partners with is kind of interesting in my mind. Caldwell would be kind of a defensive approach, but obviously Zahibo has chemistry with Diego Fagundes in the middle, so maybe we go back to that partnership that we saw in the beginning of the year. I didn't really necessarily think Fagundes looked that great coming on, per se, but maybe moving him into the middle as that guy that tries to find those through balls and try to find those seams is something you try to do. Or maybe you do tell Rowe to push a little bit higher up, because we did see that great stinging shot. And there was another really great chance by Carlos Gil, who plays that ball, and Rowe starts to run into that space. And I think that he just gassed with the Orlando conditions, that he's not able to get to the end of it. So positive and negatives from both players. Definitely in my mind, especially because of the quick turnaround, but even without the quick turnaround, I question whether or not those guys would be the automatic starters going forward. And I think that Zahibo makes a good case to at least take one of their positions.
Yeah, and before we move on to listener questions, I want to just kind of quickly read off stats. Kellen Rowe yesterday, 37 for 46 passing. That's 80%. He was 9 for 11 in the attacking third. He had 2 chances created, 5 ball recoveries, was dispossessed twice, 1 tackle, 1 interception, and obviously that long shot off of the crossbar. And he also had a really nice run into the box. Carles Gil kind of let him in, and it was just a little bit too far in front of him. So Kellen Rowe, I think another encouraging week from him. Scott Caldwell really quiet in this game, as you guys mentioned, 34 for 37 passing. Most of it, though, was in the middle third of the field. He was only 3 for 4 in the attacking third, and it was all short passes, so it's worth noting there. He did have 6 ball recoveries, not dispossessed at all, 3 tackles, 2 interceptions, 1 foul committed, 1 foul suffered. So Scott Caldwell, a bit of a quiet night, but overall, I think he gets passing grades. It does lead to the question of Wilfred Zahibo, if we will see him next game. We did get a question from Revolution Report. Where is Wilfred Zahibo? I am assuming it is a injury related. They want to kind of keep him as a precautionary measure, and the two guys from last week did so well, it kind of carried over into the next week. Sean, do you think this is Zahibo being held out of the lineup? Do you think it might have been strategic? Do you think it's injury related? And give me a quick prediction, yes or no, if we see him next week against TFC.
Yeah, I mean, I would have thought he would at least be available in a substitute role in this game. So, I was a little bit surprised that we didn't see him come off the bench when the Revolution were leading. But again, I think that goes back to Bruce Arena's strategy of kind of sticking with what's working, even when, he has those guys on the bench, which, we've already kind of dug into and questioned. But, I'm sure he's probably wasn't necessarily 90 minutes fit since he was kind of coming off an injury in that first game. And, didn't play in that one. But, I fully expect him to be in the lineup next week, unless there's more of a serious injury or more of a recovery time than we're aware of. I can't imagine any other reason why he wasn't playing in this game, other than, Bruce Arena kind of wanted to stick with those guys. So unless there's something we don't know, I think that Wilfred Zahibo is going to, certainly see minutes in the final game of the group stages.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like I said, it's just a matter of who he partners with. Diego, someone I partnered with earlier this season. Scott Caldwell will be that safer type of option. And then, of course, you have Rowe that can play there as well. And a lot of it could depend on Carlos Gil. If Carlos Gil plays, because so much relies on him playing that outside mid position, although he comes a lot into the center quite a bit during this MLS's back tournament, more than I thought we saw last year. So if he's not available, who do you play there? Maybe you move Diego Fagundes out to the right wing like we saw during this past game, or maybe you switch up the tactics a little bit like we saw at the beginning of this season, where it's actually Pania and Bunbury playing those wide areas, and they're playing it a little bit differently. It's not as much as that right wing coming in and then using basically Brandon Bai as the right midfielder. It's a little bit more of a direct, straighter options coming from those players on the outside midfield spots. I think there's a lot to think about because of the short turnaround, because I imagine you're going to see a decent amount of turnover in order to keep those guys fresh. Because like you mentioned, Greg, this is probably a team that is going to advance no matter what to the next round of the tournament, to the knockout stage.
Yeah, it would take I don't want to bring up Trinidad and Tobago, but it would take a Trinidad and Tobago level of series of events to kind of all go against the Revolution for them to not make the next series or the next to advance out of the group stage. So we should see some rotation, especially with the short turnaround. But we'll find out. I do expect to see Wilfred Zahibo. I agree with both you guys. I think Wilfred Zahibo is much needed for the TFC game. While we're in the central midfield, we did get a question too from OSZ19 from Discord. What is Bruce Arena's fascination with Scott Caldwell? I don't see what Bruce sees in him being a constant starting central midfielder. Would rather have Isaac Ankin get minutes than Scotty. Seth, you kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. What does Bruce see in Scotty, and why does he keep playing him?
I mean, I don't know if Bruce really is an automatic fan of Scott Caldwell. Like I said, when he first came in, Scott Caldwell wasn't getting a lot of time. And it's only until this MLS back tournament that he's really getting consistent minutes and going beyond. I mean, in the opener, to be pulled after 45 minutes is we saw that a lot during the Brad Friedel era, but we haven't really seen that during the Bruce Arena era. So that was kind of a sign that he doesn't see enough out of Scott Caldwell. But I think that he's building some confidence in that Bruce Arena is seeing that, and Bruce Arena is seeing that Scott Caldwell is a tempo guy. Scott Caldwell is a hard worker on the defensive end of the field. And I think that one thing that Scott Caldwell is showing a little bit more is that ability to try to find like a longer ball over the top to create an opportunity that way. So I wouldn't necessarily Bruce Arena wouldn't necessarily say that Bruce Arena is a automatic fan, a huge fan of Scott Caldwell. I think that he likes him as a player and that he's built more trust in Scott Caldwell. But I think that that he's probably one of the best options because there isn't a lot of options there to play the defensive midfield role, and I think that's why Matt Polster comes in. So with Zahibo out, that pretty much guarantees that you have to play Scott Caldwell as a defensive midfielder. Because Ankin, we haven't really seen a lot of him. He looked sharp in the substitute appearances that he made before, but I'm not sure if he's ready for that big of a role. And you probably want someone to be at least a little bit more defense-minded, especially if you're going to play a Rowe or a Diego, who are definitely more attack-minded players.
Yeah, you make some great points there, and I don't think there's a fascination with Scott Caldwell from Bruce Arena for those exact reasons that Seth stated. You kind of look at his career, and he was much more of an automatic starter or a regular starter under Jay Heaps, and he was much more of a regular starter than with Brad Friedel, and then Bruce Arena took over, and he really struggled for minutes under Bruce Arena for a long time. I think since Bruce Arena took over, the most minutes he had were 12 as a late game substitute up until August 17th when he got his first start. And even then he was pulled until halftime, and then he went another 3 games with no minutes, then had a late sub appearance, and then finally on September 25th, went 90 minutes, the only game where he played more than a half under Bruce Arena last season, and then kind of bizarrely started in the playoffs, which nobody really expected. And then again this season, as Seth meant, he got pulled at first in the first half at halftime against Montreal in the first game of the season, and then finally this MLS's Back Tournament is when he started to get regular minutes in consecutive games for Bruce Arena. So I don't think there's a fascination there. I think it's again kind of a thought that Scott Caldwell is a pretty consistent, reliable guy that. While he may not have so much upside on the offensive end, and while he may not be a guy that's going to have a massive influence on a game, he's a guy that's not going to cost you the game with his mistakes, minus some notable ones with when Brad Friedel was the coach, but I think that's kind of an anomaly for him. But he's just a very safe player. We mentioned his passing stats and how he's at or above 90% almost every game. And you don't really see those turnovers from him on a regular basis that we've been seeing from Kellen Rowe. So Ken, when you get to a situation like this, and guys aren't 100% match fit, guys aren't 100% ready for competitive action, I think Scott Caldwell is just kind of that consistent, steady guy. And Bruce Arena's hand was forced a bit with Wilfred Zahibo because with him being hurt in the first game, I don't think there's any way you go into a game starting Diego Fagundes and Kellen Rowe as your central midfielders. That's just kind of a crazy proposition to me. So I think that the hand was kind of forced by Zahibo, and I think that Bruce Arena, like Seth has said, kind of recognizes the upside to Scott Caldwell and that he's a guy that's not going to make many mistakes. But I don't think there's any. I don't think that Bruce Arena thinks Scott Caldwell is this amazing number 6 that's going to kind of carry the Revolution to a championship. I think he just recognizes him as a good complementary player that in a situation like this isn't going to cost you the game.
Yeah, and Scott Caldwell too. I mean, is a good complementary player is a good way to put Scott Caldwell's role, and he's been more or less forced into this role with Luis Caicedo's injury that's put him out for the season, and then Wilfred Zahibo's kind of short-term injury. Caldwell is kind of your only option, your defensive-minded option in the midfield, because I think with Diego Fagundes and Kellen Rowe, you're a little bit exposed defensively there. So I think Caldwell is making these starts recently kind of more out of need, and it's kind of good to have him. One person that we haven't mentioned is Matt Polster. It seems like Bruce is coming in to bring in Matt Polster to kind of take over the Scott Caldwell role for depth in the central midfield. So I don't think he has any fascination. I think Bruce is just playing him out of need in the short term, and I think Scott Caldwell is doing a fairly decent job of it overall. So, moving on, one question we did get early, it was about the subs, which we kind of touched on earlier, but worth reiterating. Jay Hondo on Twitter asked us, why doesn't Arena take advantage of the 5-sub rule by making more subs earlier in the game? It's a bit interesting, too, because 2 weeks before the MLS's Back Tournament, Bruce Arena kind of gave the endorsement to making the 5-sub rule more permanent or seeing it more in the future, long term. And he said he's made another comment too about how you need 5 subs in the Orlando Heat. So we're really only seeing 2 or 3 subs kind of throughout the second half, and it's really based on need basis. We don't, as we touched on it earlier. Sean, why is Bruce Arena doing that?
Yeah, I think it's just a comfort thing for Bruce Arena, and it goes back to the point that I've made before, that Bruce Arena is a guy that likes to rely on his veterans. And particularly in a short tournament like this, there's not a lot of room for error. You can't afford to lose a couple games, because if you do, you're going home. And so I do think it's a comfort level thing. And maybe if the preseason was a couple months longer, or if it was actually July and the Revs had played a lot of games, if it was actually a standard July and the Revs had played a lot of games before this and gotten guys a chance to get some minutes, there'd be more comfort there. But I don't think there's enough trust from Bruce Arena and guys like Tajon Buchanan and guys like Justin Rennicks to necessarily put them out there and take out a Christian Pania. And I think that was kind of reflected in his post-game comments. I disagree with that strategy, but I think that's where Bruce Arena is coming from, is that, again, this is a short tournament, not a lot of room for error, and he hasn't necessarily seen enough from these young guys yet to trust them in those situations for more than a few minutes in a close game.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that Sean said there.
Thanks, Seth. I'll give you the next question, Seth. Are there any players you want to see more playing time out of? Are there any the second part of this question is, are there any academy products you want to see on Revs 2 having their season coming up, or on the first team? But it'll be a two-part question here of, are there any players you want to see playing more in this tournament? And then secondly, what academy players are you excited to see in the future?
Yeah, we mentioned it a few times now. I think that Jones and Buchanan are the two that I really is interested in, because this tournament is built for young, eager players to use it as a showcase. And those guys are creative. Those guys have the speed for days. And I think that, in the first game, part of the reason why Rowe and Caldwell did so well is because they brought so much energy, and where Montreal was not bringing the energy, them pressing and them getting a little bit forward and getting in the face of them higher up the field created a lot of difficulty and created a lot of difficulty for Montreal and a lot of opportunity for the Revs. So to put guys like Buchanan and Jones out there, to tell them to go at people and create chances and to press people, I bet they'd be eager to do something like that. I bet they're chomping at the bit to have an opportunity. So those are two that I'd really like to see. And I think Rivera is another guy that I'd like to see. He looked really good during the preseason. He was linking up with guys. He was finding the back of the net. And again, that's a guy that Arena mentions and talks about as someone that can make a difference in this tournament. So this last game of the group stage is interesting because in some ways the Revs have sealed their fate. Obviously, they wish they could have 6 points right now as opposed to 4 points. It's a shorter turnaround. So what do you do? Like, what lineup changes do you make? Do you go full-scale changes? Do you just move some guys around? I think at the very least, you definitely go to your bench earlier to get some guys on the field. Greg, you mentioned Trinidad and Tobago, so I'm guessing that you think that Bruce will make no changes and they'll lose and they will not advance to the tournament. Is that what you believe?
Well, I did not say that. I did not say that. I did not say that. I'm just saying we have seen, an unfortunate series of events, occur in this sort of similar situation with Bruce Arena teams. But overall, as I said for my key takeaway, I'm not panicked at all. I expect to see some rotation, and I expect the Revs to have a decent enough result to move on from the group stage. That's all I'm saying. If you're asking me about rotation, I do expect to see some changes.
Fair. The second part of the question talked about Revs 2. I'll be honest, I haven't really followed along much with Revs 2. I do think that it's exciting that some of the guys that Richie Williams coached in the USL team has come over, because obviously he knows those guys pretty well. Woodruff also being another name that has come up quite a bit as someone that has some promise. But I'm not really sure what to expect regarding some of the academy players over there or the team as a whole.
Yeah, I'm excited to see Revs 2 actually take the field, and I'd be happier to answer this question after I've watched them play a few times, because, I think, some of the best talent on that team, could have a chance to get some minutes for the Revolution in the future, but, I don't know enough about a lot of these guys to make an assumption on who on Revs 2 is going to be exciting to watch, or, who from the academy is going to step up to Revs 2 to really make an impact. As to who I want to see in the tournament, I think my list is very similar to Seth. I've been railing for DeJuan Jones from the beginning. DeJuan Jones, kind of by nature of who the Revolution have been lacking in the past, has been forced to play a lot of left back. But from what we heard from him, he was getting some opportunities to train in more of a midfield role, and we know that was where he played in college. And to me, it would be really nice to see him get an opportunity to play kind of that more attacking role in one of these games. Again, if you have a guy like DeJuan Jones, who's probably one of the fastest guys in MLS, if not, right at the top of that list. And then Tajon Buchanan, who's, pretty close behind him in speed. I would think if you brought those guys on around the 75th minute to run at tired legs, that would be an absolute nightmare for the fullbacks of an opposing team. And with 5 subs, there's no reason you can't do that. So those are 2 guys I'd really like to see. I think Damian Rivera was mentioned earlier on in the podcast. I forget by who. And, he's a guy that we saw a lot from in preseason. Maybe he's not the guy that you put in a close game, but maybe if the Revolution have a 2-goal lead late or down 2 goals late, he's a guy that you can get some minutes to and see what he has to offer. the young guys are the guys that I would really like to see get chances, especially in this third group stage game, and especially because, as Greg said, it would take a very unfortunate series of events for the Revolution not to advance, even if they did lose this game. So, the young guys and the guys that we just mentioned are kind of the ones that I would really like to see get more minutes and have an opportunity to shine, especially those, kind of young wingers that can have an impact late in the game with their pace and their youth.
It'll be really interesting to see, because I do agree that we're going to see roster rotation. So one guy that's probably on that list is Alexander Butner. He's a guy who hasn't played a lot of soccer up until these last couple games. He's looked really good. I know his passing was down this past game, but I think that defensively he was sharp. And I think he steps to the ball really well. And I've seen that in the last two games, that he can read things and try to step in and create an interception and then try to get forward from there. But, having played these two games, I imagine he's due for a rest. So does DeJuan Jones play there, or Seth Sinovic? Seth Sinovic didn't necessarily look great during the preseason, but he is a veteran guy, and I know that he was dealing with a little bit of a fitness knock issue during preseason at one point. And then DeJuan Jones is very, very speedy, very good, but doesn't necessarily know the position as well as the other two experienced guys. So that might be a little bit of a tell as far as, is he kind of making this transition full time to being a left back, and that's going to be his spot going forward? Or is he just got to be a utility guy that can be plugged in anywhere given any given situation? He's also an option at right back as well. I mean, Brandon Byers played a lot of minutes, so maybe you see DeJuan Jones play right back, Sesanovic play left back. It depends on, again, how much roster rotation Bruce Arena feels comfortable with.
Outside of seeing some rotation in the lineup and seeing some of our young, promising athletes, Randy LH wants to know why should Revs fans be optimistic about the Toronto game? Seth?
I think that Toronto's defense isn't that good, and that's going to create opportunities for them to go out there and attack and to hopefully get a couple balls in the back of the net. I mean, that game against Montreal was pretty wild. I don't know if you guys watched that one. It was back and forth, and Montreal definitely came out and had a better game. They definitely came out to play, so it's not the same Montreal that the Revs played. But I think that if they go out there and put pressure on the back line, they can create opportunities. They can create turnovers. So that's something to look forward to. Going back to Adam Buksa, I think the one thing he could do better is press. I don't think he necessarily presses the ball as well as Teal Bunbury. And that's kind of a high bar to set. Teal Bunbury's thing is about being energetic. He's going to press you. He's never going to give up on the ball. So you wonder if Adam Buksa continues to start, or maybe this is a game for Teal Bunbury to go after the back line. Because even if it's not the starting back line for Toronto, bringing on Saman is almost guaranteed that more goals are going to happen or more mistakes are going to happen. He has not looked good this tournament. And Zabaleta, the guy who also pairs with him sometimes, has also not looked that good. So if you're looking for optimism, it has to do with that back line being vulnerable. The attack is very, very good. Like, they're so dynamic. They're so fluid. But that's going to be really intimidating, especially because Josie hasn't played, I believe, at all this tournament, or certainly hasn't started this tournament.
He hasn't even been in the 18.
Okay, yeah. So the 23, right?
Yeah, 23. Sorry, which makes it even more crazy. 23.
But you imagine that hopefully they want to get him. I know that there were some issues because he was in Florida, and then when he went back to Toronto, he had to quarantine. So maybe Toronto is looking for him to get into the lineup now, and so if he's in the lineup, that's dangerous. Akinela, which I mentioned earlier, is very, very good. Everyone should be hoping that he plays for the U.S. national team going forward. I believe he played for the U-17, but he could play for Canada and maybe somewhere else as well. So the attack, even with some roster rotation, is probably going to be good for Toronto, but the defense is something that Gustavo Bo is probably excited about. But of course, the Revs would look very different if Carlos Gil is not playing. So lots of question marks going into that last game.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that I'm interested to see. As far as optimism, I think Seth laid out some good points. But as far as what I'm looking for in this game, one thing that I think is going to be kind of fun to watch is seeing Adam Buksa go up against Omar Gonzalez. I imagine the two of them will be matched up a lot. Buksa 6'3", Omar Gonzalez 6'5". Gonzalez, a U.S. national team veteran. It'll be a good test for him. So, if Adam Buksa can win aerial duels against Omar Gonzalez and kind of, find Gustavo Bo, that's going to be a fun thing to watch for sure. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. And then, if Carles Gil is out of this game, they'll be even more dependent on that. But, at the same time, we don't know what lineup changes Toronto is going to make either. Both of these teams are probably, are in pretty good position to be advancing to the next round. So, we might see a lot of changes from Toronto. We might see a lot of changes from the Revolution. I don't really know what to expect from this game, but if we see, similar lineups, one matchup that I'm really looking forward to is Buksa versus Gonzalez.
Yeah, and one other thing too that's interesting, that's kind of a bit of a side narrative, is that if you're a 1 seed, you play one of the 3 seeds, and if you're a 2 or 3 seed, you play either a 1 or a 2 seed. If you look at the groups, I mean, right now Orlando City is a 1 seed, San Jose is a 1 seed, and then you also have some 3 seeds that are like Sporting Kansas City, Seattle, LAFC is a 3 seed now. So it'll be interesting to see how both of these teams kind of approach the game, because being a 1 seed is not necessarily a good thing. It might still lead to a bad matchup. I still would want the Revs to come out and win the game and win the group, but that it might be you might not be getting the Toronto A team. We might not be getting the Revs A team. So in terms of why I would be optimistic, I would just say this is more of a low stress game that you really don't have to be too stressed out about, because if the Revs end up as the 2 seed in the group, which unless DC beats Montreal, which is very possible, they will be the 2 seed. They're guaranteed at least the 2 seed. It's just not a high stress game for me. So real quick, we got a couple of other questions talking about Gustavo Bo. Camboozle Newton on Discord asks us about Gustavo Bo's decision making. He says, why is Gustavo Bo unable to make the correct decision in regards to making the correct pass, run, touch, shot? Certainly Gustavo Bo had 7 shots yesterday, 2 of them on target. And there is some questions too about once Carles Gil is off the field, Gustavo Bo, everything kind of runs through him, and he obviously cannot fill in Carles Gil's shoes. Is there an issue with Gustavo Bo's playmaking? Sean, I'll start with you.
I honestly don't know if it's decision making so much as it is about execution, and I think it's a sharpness issue. And I'm kind of willing to give them a pass for the first 2 games of this tournament, and that they haven't had an opportunity to be training and playing competitive games for that long. But to me, the execution and the sharpness on whether it's the final pass or the final shot has been lacking, and it's more about that than necessarily the decision making.
Yeah, he's such an interesting character for me because he's so bold and you want him to do that, but sometimes he does too much on the ball. There was times when he would dribble where maybe he should have laid the ball off and they then opened up and tried to play a different way. There was times where he tried these flicks that didn't quite come off, but at the same time you kind of know that's the type of player that he is, that he's going to be bold, that he's going to try things. And I made a comparison a little bit that he reminded me a little bit of Clint Dempsey, because he's just someone that goes out there and plays soccer. And it reminds me of Paul Mariner saying that he's really enjoying his football, that he just goes out there and he runs around and pops up in spaces. And I got to imagine he's a nightmare to play against, because you don't know where he's going to go all the time or what he's going to do. I don't think necessarily he had a great game last night, especially as it went on. He missed that golden opportunity from Adam Buksa, but he also looked tired towards the end. Him and Gil didn't get back as much as we saw in the first game. They weren't as active, I thought, as we saw in the first game. But he's still a really good player. He's still someone that in any given moment he's going to pop up and create something. I think that there are things to look at and kind of want and hope to get a little bit more out of Bo.
Yeah, and I don't think I went through his stats earlier, but 7 shots, 2 on target, 31 for 39 passing. That's 80%. He was 15 for 22 in the attacking third. He had 4 chances created, although I think some were from corner kicks. 4 ball recoveries, dispossessed 3 times, 3 tackles, 1 interception. He also had a really nice move on the right wing in the 41st minute where he just completely turned a defender the wrong way, and it led to an open cross. He sent it low for Buksa, and the cross was deflected. But it was still he did have some really nice moments yesterday. It just didn't lead to any goals. And I think when you have a guy taking 7 shots and it doesn't lead to goals, I think it looks a lot worse than it is. But, you want Gustavo Bo taking those long-range shots and lighting off those missiles, because even though it didn't lead to anything in yesterday's game, it got us 3 points against Montreal. One more question here from @DenDun29 on Twitter. I feel the Revs should be looking for a goal-scoring poacher off the bench, someone who can give you 15 to 20 minutes late in the game, 2 or 3 chances created. Teal is the pacer and pressure forward with the lead, but we need a goal-scoring forward off the bench. Who would you sign? And I'm going to just kind of throw out a name. Justin Rennicks is there. I'm not sure why we're not using Justin Rennicks as much as we are, but he's a highly touted prospect. I think a lot of people had high hopes for him. He was in the U20 World Cup last year. I don't see why he's not getting more of a shot as this 15 to 20 minute guy late in the game that can create a chance for you. Seth, I'll go to you. Anyone come to mind for filling this role?
Yeah, I think you're right that Justin Rennicks is the guy that should be doing it, especially because you want some of your homegrowns to develop into first-team players. So if you're constantly going out and signing people, you're not going to have that pathway from the academy to the first team. And what you're looking for right now is a guy off the bench that can grab some goals. So you're not asking for full games from Justin Rennicks. You're asking for him to go out there and play 15, 20 minutes and try to grab a goal, which is something that we saw him do in the Olympics and something that he almost did at the beginning of this season. Teal Bunbury probably still is your first choice to go to because he has that proven history, because he's played in this league for so long. And he probably is chomping at the bit to do, press people, to go after people, to try to create that opportunity out of nothing. If you're looking to sign someone that can score goals late in games, Alan Gordon, maybe Steven Lenhart. I mean, those guys can probably hobble around the field and head the ball in once or twice for you. But yeah, I don't know if you necessarily go out and spend money. I mean, you just got Buxa, who's a big signing to come in. I'm not sure how many guys you can bring in that are going to be willing to do that and off the bench. Again, maybe those guys obviously I mentioned as MLS veterans are obviously jokes, but maybe you can find a guy who's still hanging around that wants to play but is going to come off the bench. I mean, you look at Higuain, he's 35 years old for DC United, and he's also a coach, but he's also someone that wants to still play soccer and go out there. So he willingly signs with DC United, knowing that he's probably going to be a bench option. But of course, Ben Olsen has a issue now that probably Higuain maybe could be a starter. So yeah, maybe you look for someone like that that can fill in that role.
Yeah, I feel like anytime a question like this comes up, somebody throws out the name Patrick Mullins from 6 years ago, forgetting the fact that he's good for maybe 1 goal a season in recent years. But when I hear a question like this, I'm kind of with Seth. It's kind of hard to go out there and find a goal scorer that's willing to sit on your bench, especially kind of at this point of the season too. I would also like to see the Revolution find a way to develop talent from their academy to get Justin Rennicks those minutes. I do think that Teal Bunbury is a serviceable backup striker, even if you're looking for a goal scorer and not more of the effort guy that it can be. I think he works in that role too. Realistically, I just think that's a hard role to fill. Goal scorers are not easy to find, and goal scorers that are going to be your backup are even harder to find. And if you're looking for like a Patrick Mullins level player, all right, fine, but I'm not sure that's something that really impacts the Revs' fortunes going forward.
I just realized this isn't the same guy that was giving you a hard time last year, Sean, about a few years ago when you said you didn't want Quincy Amarikwa. I think this is a different person, correct?
I think so.
Okay. I just realized this isn't a troll question about Quincy Amarikwa again, is it? But
Quincy is available.
He is certainly available. And, if we're talking about goal scorers too, I think we got to mention Hauche. I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. I mean, he must be available, I assume. So, and I'm always on the bring back Brian Wright bandwagon. He never got his fair shot. So
you saw that he scored against Tim Howard in the USL, right?
Oh, I sure did. He's lighting it up in Birmingham. So I'm a big Brian Wright guy. He's lighting it up in USL. I know that doesn't always translate to MLS, as we know from Sean Okoli, but yeah, he's doing well in Birmingham. I'm looking forward to watching more games on ESPN Plus. Go any Rev South. Before we go, though, we on the topic of Teal Bunbury, we did have one more news item. Teal Bunbury did sign a contract extension with the Revolution. He was set to be a free agent at the end of the season. Sean, quick, we don't know contract terms as of right now, so it's hard to kind of grade this move, whether or not it's good or bad. But any quick thoughts on this, Sean, about Teal Bunbury staying long term?
Yeah, I mean, without knowing the salary, it's hard to make too many judgments on it. I would assume that at most he got kind of a minimal salary increase. As we were discussing, he's been he's a good depth piece behind Adam Buksa. He's a good change of pace guy that, plays very differently. The salary from last year for him was $270,000, which seems high, but at the same time for kind of a backup striker, a backup winger, a rotation guy, a guy who can score goals and can get hot and streaky, it's not unreasonable. So assuming it stayed around that level, I think it makes sense. But, at the same time, if you're one of those people, like Seth was saying, that wants to see more academy guys get minutes and kind of less reliance on all, aging veterans, maybe you're less happy about this. But, I don't think it would make sense to let Teal Bunbury walk away. Assuming his contract was up at the end of the season, I don't think it would make sense to kind of let him walk away for nothing.
Yeah, I'm happy with the signing. I think the signing is fine. I think that he's a depth piece at this point. He can play up top. He can play either as a left mid or a right mid. I think that he's also a locker room guy. He's very, very well liked. He's by the fans and the players. One thing I thought was interesting is I talked to a source who said that Bruce Arena is trying to lock in some of the core so that some of those guys are going to be around for longer. We saw that with Andrew Farrell being signed. We saw that with Matt Turner being signed. We see that now with Teal Bunbury being signed. And I think that that's an important thing to consider, that you want to find some of those pieces, be able to relay, like, here's where you fall in the pecking order right now, but we want you to stay around for these reasons because it creates a culture where you feel respected, you feel like you are part of a team, and you feel like you want to give everything you have to the team because they've given you something. They've given you some trust and they've communicated that to you.
Yep. And I think the only negative really I can see is it impacts kind of the youth, as Sean kind of mentioned. I mean, this obviously has a downward negative effect on guys like Justin Renix, who you would think would be kind of that backup, 15 to 20 minute backup striker. It probably impacts Tayon Buchanan. Are we going to see DeJuan Jones on the wing? Probably not. So, I think it kind of keeps the backlog existing. But is Teal Bunbury worth his salary? Yeah, he is. And he's not taking up an international spot. He fills a role. He fills multiple roles for this team. So overall, I think this fits the Bruce Arena philosophy of signing reliable veterans who can do a job that you need them to do. And again, we don't know salary numbers, but assuming there's no massive, increase spike in his pay, I think it's probably a good move overall for the Revs. So, guys, any final thoughts before we depart here today?
No, I think that that was an interesting game to watch and to take in. Obviously, a frustrating game from the Revolution perspective. It'll be interesting to see how this next one goes and then how the rest of the season goes because Bruce Arena came in last year and he did it really well. He showed that there's a lot left in the tank, that he has all these ideas, that he can build the culture. And this season hasn't gone quite as well for him. That said, there's so many things that are weird about this year. Missing Carlos Heel the first 2 games of the season changes this team. There's no question about it. So you can't really judge Bruce Arena based on that. And then down in Orlando, these games are weird because of the conditions, because of the quarantine factor, the bubble factor. But to only have 1 win on the season so far isn't necessarily great for the Revolution. So, as we continue to get more games and as we continue to see more, we'll be able to really understand what this Revolution team is all about.
Yeah, look, the first 2 games of this tournament, you had 2 teams that I think were kind of willing to take more of a defensive approach against the Revolution for different reasons, and we're kind of more on the back foot. I don't think no matter what lineup we get against Toronto is going to be that way. This game I think is going to be really exciting. It's weird to say, to look at the Revolution and say, they've given up 1 goal in 2 games, and then look at Toronto who's given up 5 goals in 2 games and kind of put them on the same boat as far as defensive question marks. But I think the reality is they do both have a lot of defensive question marks, and there's the potential that this game could be a lot more open than the first 2 games and have a lot more goals. So I'm very excited to see that game and think that there's potential that instead of a 1 or 2 goal game, we could see a 3, 4, or 5 goal game this time and have a lot more action around the goal mouth.
And quickly, guys, where can we find you guys on Twitter and social media?
You can find me at SethMan31, and I write for the Bent Musket.
And you can find me at Sean L. Donahue.
And Seth, do you still have a pretty good article coming out soon? You teased it the last time you were on, and I haven't seen anything yet.
Yeah, still working on it. Still, talking to people and putting together the final touches. So, hopefully that will come out next week or when it's ready or when I get my act together. But the first draft is done. People have looked at it. I'm not going to show it to you, Greg, because I know that you'll show everyone else.
Damn. Well,
Can't trust that guy.
it was worth a shot. But make sure you follow Seth and Sean, and also make sure you follow the Bent Musket at the Bent Musket on Twitter, and like their Facebook page too. You can follow us at Revolution Recap and like our Revolution Recap Facebook page. Also, please leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. The Revs play next Tuesday morning against Toronto FC. We will be back next week at some point, not sure what day yet, but we'll be back at some point next week to talk about that game and whoever the Revs get lined up against in the knockout rounds. Knock on wood, they should make it, as I've said 300 times. But until then, thank you everyone for listening, and go Revs.